A very good evening. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're watching The Globe. And it's been we've just seen the President a little bit earlier on delivering the State of the Nation address. And it was certainly not without its drama. As we saw, it was delayed, and predictably so, because the economic freedom fighters had said that they would not allow the President to deliver the State of the Nation address. Well, he did deliver it in the end, but as I said, not without those rumptions at the beginning. But let's take a look now at the speech and what it meant and what we can take out of it. And joining us to unpack it is political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, and also who's a professor of political science at the University of South Africa, UNISA, and Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who's a development economist at Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you very much for joining us, both of you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening.
All right. Maybe let me start with you, Dr. Moleko, and this will be the same question for you, Prof, is just to give me your first reflections and thoughts about the State of the Nation address. There were so many expectations, I think, from people because everyone is feeling something, whether it's electricity, unemployment, something. And so this was an important speech, and I just wonder, as you were listening, let's start with you, Dr. Moleko, your thoughts when he said, by the time he finished his speech.
I think, Peter, the first thing that I wanted to say is that the nation is in a deep crisis, and what one would have expected at a time like this, where we have not had the kind of aggressive monetary policy tightening as we have seen, the levels of household indebtedness, because the upward cost pressures on the supply side of the economy, people are unable to service their debt. Most households are struggling to put bread and food on the table. Seeing in the second week of January of this year, as we end, even this month, January, the most load shedding we've seen, 30 days almost of successive load shedding, continual, affecting economic activity, affecting household activity at a time where there's no winter, at a time where most people were still on leave, and a deliberate action to close down coal-powered fire stations. The global context isn't something we can rest on, because usually the commodities boom pushes up our expectations in terms of collections of revenue, and also because of the mineral energy complex in this country, mining usually saves the day. And this is not likely to happen. I think what the country needed at this time was a deliberate and very decisive action plan with timelines, with targets, and with a progress report of what hasn't been done to date, with a clear way forward and a path forward. We have listened to sounds like any other State of the Nation address that we could have heard in 2012, in 2011, even in 2018. And there's no real sense that there is any different action. There have always been presidential councils, whether it's the Presidential Climate Council, Presidential State-Owned Enterprise Council, National Energy Crisis Committee. There are a plethora of committees, council, task team. There was once a war room. All those interventions had plans of action, targets, but none of those have changed the fact that we have seen a plethora of load shedding that is unprecedented with all those committees and councils. What this says is that we perhaps have to relook what is the necessary action to get us out of the quagmire in. Social crises we are in, the energy crisis, and there have been, even pre-COVID, an economic crisis. And it doesn't look like these solutions that we have are going to yield any outcome that is going to change the course and the path that this country is on. For me, there is a serious crisis of leadership where we're not able to get the kind of actions that we will need for the country to move forward. I think the burden that we need for the country, the people who are crying, who need compassion, who need help, who need jobs, who need actions at a local level, at a community level, and we're just not seeing that kind of action. I think we have to accept that there are serious problems, even in the solutions that are presented, because there's no admission of the extent and the depth of the problem that we have.
Okay, we'll unpack quite a bit of what you've put on the table there. Professor Dirk Kotze, your view, what did you see? What did you hear?
Well, I think President Ramaphosa started in an unusual way. He started with the notion of the nation, the South African nation, which is not normally what the president does. He then tried to define it in terms of resilience and hope, and not the sort of the conventional way of doing it. And that was his point of departure, of immediately moving over to a discussion of Eskom, the electricity problems, load shedding, and all the issues. And then what followed was then the announcement of the state of disaster, as well as something which I think is immensely significant, and that is the fact that energy is now separated from mineral resources in terms of the portfolio that it is, that there will be a separate ministry for that in the office of the president, which means effectively that it is taken away from Gwede Mantashe. That it is now very close to the president, which is an indication that he says, well, this is something which has almost a special status in terms of importance. And thereafter, he went into the more traditional way of dealing with a State of the Nation address. That was the way in which President Mandela did it, President Mbeki did it, President Zuma did it also. And that is to look at all the different portfolios. And they sort of dealt with him in systematically, and had some comments, or have some, in some cases, almost announcements about what is in the pipeline for this, the short term. I would say until next year's election is more or less the horizon that they are talking about. So in that sense, I think it is a very comprehensive summary. I think there was an urgency in the way in which he presented it. There was certainly, he was more assertive than the previous State of the State of the Nation address. I think he was more confident also, despite what happened in the beginning when the EFF, in a sense, sort of demonstrated against him and who he is and what he's doing. So in that sense, I think that it was a different President Ramaphosa than from at least the previous two or three State of Nation addresses.
Okay. Dr. Moleko, the President said, and I'm going to quote, "What we have achieved as a nation over the past year, despite our challenges, reminds us that the promise of South Africa is alive. The progress we have seen should give us courage as we look to a better future." Is he in a different country, do you think? Or are there things that have progressed that we're not seeing?
Let's look at the statistics, Peter, and that's what guides my thinking. The first point, I think, mentioned by the president himself was 10,000 jobs that were created for unemployed TVET college graduates, which has now been increased to 20,000 TVET college graduates. Yet we sit in a situation in the country now where there are, at least with the youth unemployment levels, 62% unemployment. We're also seeing that it goes up to even 75% when you include those not in education training in our country. We're sitting with more than 2.5 million discouraged work seekers. This simply means that in the unemployment levels, when they're reported, those who have simply stopped looking for work is more than 2 million. In fact, every year, 1 million people enter the labor market after graduating matric or the National Senior Certificate, and those 200,000 are able to be absorbed, or rather 180,000 to be specific, into whether at colleges or universities, and the majority of those are lost in the labor market because we do not have mechanisms in which to attract and catch those. As a result, the unemployment level in our country sits at 46%. When you look at disaggregate that, we're sitting with unemployment, the black women specifically, higher than everyone else in rural areas. We're sitting with 4 out of 9 provinces, higher than 50%. If you look at China, Brazil, the Japanese, US, Europe, unemployment sits between 3 and 12, 13%. No one is sitting with unemployment levels of 46%, even in the BRICS economies. What we're seeing when you look at national senior certificate, the pass rate is 80% on the back of a level 2-3 pass rate, pass mark of 30%, giving you equivalent pass. What you're seeing is the quality and the mediocrity in this country that is being normalized. The problem we have. When you talk about gross fixed capital formation and private sector investment together with public sector investment, it's at the lowest levels as a proportion of GDP. Even if you have met the targeted 1.2 trillion of investment levels, it doesn't translate as a proportion of GDP, which is what we look at as economists. How much money is going into investment, into manufacturing, capital equipment, and land, and investment into those that generate higher levels of return and also output generation. It's not translating to any real upward movement in your gross fixed capital formation. And that is why we have to put our finger on our infrastructure investment levels. What we're seeing is that the actions that are being done are not yielding economic impact. And that is what we need to at. And once we go into the detail to say, what is the required action therefore? If I look at agriculture, mining, manufacturing, even the gas, water, and electricity and construction, the primary and the secondary sectors, in the last 10 years, we have seen in agriculture is of the 10 years, at least 5 of the 10 years, contraction in the billions. In mining, at least 7 of the 10 years, you're seeing consecutive contractions of output. Manufacturing, we're deindustrializing. Let's leave the energy. The whole of South Africa is experiencing, the malfunction of the Eskom and the outcomes of that. And so you're seeing continually output that is actually contracting, resulting in a lot of problems at a macro level, and we're putting microeconomic reforms and not the necessary macro reforms to actually enhance economic activity. So I do believe that even if you are talking about numbers, you've got to look at the impact, and the impact over time, the results and independent statistics are showing us, even GDP numbers, Peter, you would know, are declining. The target for this year is less than 1%. Every year since the last decade, on average, we've had 1.8% average growth, and this has declined. This is the worst we've ever seen. But we seem to be stuck in a low growth trap as South Africa, and we're unable to come out of it. What it's telling you is that the economic strategy of investment-led growth is not yielding outcomes, and we perhaps need to relook that and change that if we want to see a change in economic outcomes.
All right. Professor, I'm just wondering, because there's a lot of debate about this new ministry, and there was questions raised about when he should do the reshuffle. Should he have done it before SONA or after? Because it may be actually that when he does the reshuffle, all of what's happened today will make sense.
Yes, I think that is possibly his logic. That's what he has now announced today will follow in the form of the different ministers and the different ministries that will emerge out of this. It is, I think there's at least 4 new ministers in the pipeline together with the Deputy President in terms of those who have been sworn in as new members of Parliament. And that's a good indication of who might be some of the new ministers who are going to enter into the cabinet. It will be interesting to see who's the minister who will take responsibility for energy or electricity in the office of the president, because it will not be the incumbent minister of in the office of the president. I think we have to take that for granted, that it will be someone else. I think what we are also looking at is what will happen with persons who are not necessarily affected or involved in the issues of energy or the mineral affairs, like, for example, the Minister Nthabiseng Moleko. I think what we have now heard tonight, the fact that Minister of Kokta, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, is the one who is responsible for the state of disaster, gives us already an indication that she will most possibly continue in the new cabinet or the reshuffled cabinet. But there might be other important positions, like, for example, the position of public administration, which has been vacant, and there was an acting minister in that position. And then also transport, which is in itself a very key ministry, given the announcements tonight that we've heard about Transnet and Prasa and others. So there's a lot that's in the pipeline, but it will give us an indication of also how President Ramaphosa is going to structure those around him, to what extent it is going to be a pro-Ramaphosa cabinet that will emerge out of this. In the past, the last term now, the past 5 years, was actually a cabinet in which it was divided. And the cabinet is supposed to work on a basis of consensus, but in the government, in the cabinet up to now, I would say that there was actually not, on many issues, many key issues, there was not actually a consensus in cabinet. So that might change the dynamics in cabinet quite significantly.
All right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So much to unpack. I had wanted to get to gender issues with Dr. Moleko and also the EFF with you, Professor Kotze, but we'll have to do it another day. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us this evening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
Peter.
indeed. Thank you. All right, so that's where we'll leave it for the time being. So a lot to debate. Most political parties saying that they haven't heard anything new. Implementation's always been lacking, so they're pretty much unhappy. But a couple of parties were happy. Al Jamaah was one of them, and also the SACP seemed to be pleased with what they heard. Anyway, we take a break and we'll have much more for you straight after this.